This is Criteria.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Criteria. I'm Thomas Miras, and I'm here with my co-host James Majewski. Hey James.
Hey Thomas. Hey everybody.
And today we are going to be discussing the last of the great Hollywood silent films, and a film by the great American director, writer, comedic actor, mime, composer, etc., Charlie Chaplin, namely his 1936 film Modern Times. But before we get to that, we've got a few little updates here. First of all, James, you just had a rousing success in the theater here in New York City.
Yeah, well, I last year we talked about the one-man show that I did here in New York, based off of Paul Claudel's Third Ode. And this year we did a two-man show, or a one-man, one-woman show. Me and my wife, Karina Majewski, she wrote a new one-act play called Arranged, and I directed it, and we both performed in it, and pretty much wore all the hats. And we did two performances over the weekend, a couple weeks ago, through this sort of arts collective that you and I, Thomas, have been pretty closely involved with over the past year or so. And it went really, really well.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, we had really good reception. Karina's been working on this play since before we were married. The play is about two characters who are placed together in a room, expected to get married. They've been arranged. They have to say yes or say no. And if they say no, they head through the door into the other room. And it's not clear what's on the other side of this door, but it's like bad. So the odds are kind of stacked toward them saying yes, and it's them sort of negotiating this space of unknowing, and decision and pressure and mystery and complementarity. At a certain point, a baby appears in the room, and then at another pivotal point, the baby disappears. So it's kind of an odd play, and it's short on specifics of like plot or narrative details.
It's kind of like the baby ghost of Christmas Future, 'cause it's just like a black robe with nothing inside.
Well, the way we handled that was a moving blanket. It was really bulky, so we were able to like wrap it up in such a way that it looked like it had some mass. And then we had a pretty elaborate sound design that was done by a friend of ours, Linda Mukherjee. She went to school with us out in California. So we kind of created this this baby soundtrack of cries and coos and gagas and all that.
Like Charlie Chaplin, you did not make the sound effects and music.
No, but I did everything else. So the set design, the lighting design, it was definitely quite an undertaking. And then, of course, loving and caring for our soon-to-be 2-year-old son. And my wife was 7 months, now 8 months pregnant, but she was 7 months pregnant at the time. So she was about as pregnant as you can be and still be up on stage performing, getting up and down from the floor. She slaps me at one point, throws me to the ground. Like it was definitely a physically involved performance, as virtually all performances are. And yes, the second night in particular was really gratifying. At the reception afterwards, there was sort of this spontaneous request for a Q&A session. So we had this impromptu Q&A, and there was a lot of really great engagement with the themes of the play. People were just, really, really drawing a lot out of it, which was really, really satisfying for Karina, because I think that as a playwright, that's like the most you can hope for, that audiences will not only be entertained by your play, but then will find themselves, thinking about it and interrogating it and wanting to know more.
Right.
And of course that was really satisfying for me too, because as the director, you're really just trying to serve the play and find strategies for taking what's latent on the page and bringing it to an audience. And so yeah, it was just a terrific learning experience for all of us, and a terrific success for us, for our marriage, for Art House 2B that helped to present it. Yeah.
Well, I remember last time with the one man show, you talked about how it was encouraging to be able to do work without relying on like the theater establishment, or like the wider theater community, even.
Definitely.
Really, as a Catholic,
Yeah.
And so did this build on that for you in some way?
Definitely. Yeah. I think that when you're an actor, like one of the things that drew me to acting in the first place was that I did not have to be generating all of the work. Theater is a super collaborative enterprise most of the time. And so it was appealing to me that I could sort of plug into work that other people had done or were doing. So someone else had written this play, someone else was directing it, someone else was dealing with like the nightmare of logistics of putting on a play.
Right.
And that I could just kind of step into that and bring my own sort of interpretation, my own spin, my own energy into that. But I think that, a pitfall of that is that for actors, I think a lot of the time you can feel somewhat disempowered. I don't like to use that word or that kind of terminology, but what I mean is that you can begin to feel like you are dependent upon or you sort of owe it to others to generate work and to be the main creative force behind work, or else you have nothing. And I think that like depending on who you are as a performer, you may be happy with that, and that's perfectly all right. But for me, it's always been somewhat dissatisfying, and I've sort of looked with a jealous eye at like the visual artist alone in his studio who's able to sort of just kind of conceive of a project and then see it through to completion.
Right.
And so the more that I get to do this sort of thing, either alone or now together with my wife, and then hopefully, in the future with more and more people, I think the more, the more convinced of this truth I'm going to be, which is that like, actors possess this capacity as well, that,
Right.
and that, or at least in my case, that I'm grateful that God gives me these gifts and these graces to be a theater maker,
Mm-hmm.
and to make the kind of work that I really want to see myself be a part of. Like Korean and I were talking about it afterwards, like, this is really the kind of material that we want to be working on. These are the kind of themes that we want to be wrestling with in our work, and these are the kind of things that we want to be discussing with other artists and with audiences. So it's really, really awesome when you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Whether that's something and an opportunity that comes your way, or an opportunity that you generate for yourself. So, and of course, at the end of the day, none of it is generated on our own. Like that's the best part of it, is that like at the end of the day, it's all a gift of God.
Right.
And so that's what's so even more satisfying as an artist, is that whereas if you're going around looking for permission, looking for approval, looking for just like the next sort of seal of approval that comes from a casting director or from another theater company, like that can be really exciting and really satisfying, but it only lasts for so long before you're kind of like in the same position again of like needing to be chosen. But when you see that God has chosen you, and that God gives you these gifts, and that God is supporting you and bringing your dreams to fruition, that's like a satisfaction that doesn't leave. So it's like really fulfilling. Like Karina and I both, as artists, drank really deeply of this experience, and I know that that's going to be with us, for the rest of our lives. That's not just something that you end up on like on a callback list, or in a magazine write up or something.
Right.
That's like
great, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've got some really cool news. This is like the last episode that we're going to be recording before your
Yeah, this will be the last episode of this or my own podcast that I record for the rest of April. We're recording this. This will come out towards the end of April, but we're recording this the day before I go off to play piano on a cruise ship for 3 weeks.
That's awesome.
So this is something I've done before. I don't know if listeners may or may not know. I have a background in jazz piano. And so I've done some cruise gigs in the past, but the last one I did was in 2017. So I've done 3 of them, but it's been like 5 years. And I took this gig, and so I'm excited. Yeah, I'll be playing in a quartet with piano, bass, drums, and guitar. The guitarist, I think, is going to sing. And we'll be doing a variety of things on the ship, playing in the lounge, being in the backup band for guest entertainers and things. But yeah, so it'll be really cool. And we're going out so I'm flying to Fort Lauderdale tomorrow. And the ship goes from Fort Lauderdale down through the Panama Canal, I guess.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to Colombia, and then I think, I don't know the order of everything, but we're going to Colombia.
And then you're coming back up the West Coast.
Costa Rica, a bunch of places in Mexico, and then we're hitting San Diego, Victoria, Vancouver, and I get off in Seattle.
Wow.
On April 30th. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm thankful for the opportunity. It's been a while since I've played professionally much. So, yeah.
And are you working every day when you're on the ship?
Yeah, we're working every day, and it looks like it depends on what the duties of the day are. But when we're playing the lounge, I think it's going to be like four sets a day.
Wow, that's
one
really cool.
And then one in the late afternoon, and then 3 in the evening.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and it's Holland America, and Holland America, apparently because they were founded by this old Dutch Catholic family, they're the only cruise line in the world that has a priest on all of their ships and daily mass.
Dude, that's awesome.
So yeah, it was great. And I was nervous because my first day of the contract is on Sunday, and usually the first day you're going to all kinds of meetings and orientations and safety, HR type things.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it to Sunday Mass. They're flying me out the evening of Saturday, so I can't make it to Mass Saturday night. But then they were like, oh, we have a meeting Mass is at 5 p.m., I found out. And then they said we have a team meeting at 5:30. So I emailed the entertainment director, and I was like, hey, can I please go to Mass at 5 and just show up at the meeting after it's over? And she was like, oh, yeah, sure.
Sweet.
Yeah, so I was really happy about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so I'm excited.
So you've been living it up as you get ready to leave the city for a few weeks. So last night you actually went and saw a Broadway show, yeah?
Yeah, well, I was going to go in mid-April, but I was able to exchange my tickets so that I could still go. Yeah, so earlier in the week I went to the Village Vanguard, which is a famous jazz club in the city. I saw some great jazz. And then last night I went to see a Broadway play, which is something that, even though I've lived in New York for almost 9 years now, I haven't done much. I'm not really into musicals, or at least into contemporary musicals. I'm interested in plays, but I don't always really know what's good, But I saw that this David Mamet play called American Buffalo was running with Lawrence Fishburne, a.k.a. Morpheus from The Matrix.
Yeah.
Sam Rockwell, who I've only seen in one thing, but he's great. And Darren Criss, who I guess was in Glee. I didn't know anything about him. He did a fine job. That there's only 3 characters in the play, so it's just the 3 of them. And so I decided to go. I asked you, should I go see? I don't know anything about the play. You said yes. You said it was the first great play that you ever saw. And so, yeah, I went, and it was really good. It was really good. All the actors, I don't know if anybody's seen any David Mamet films, because he made films as well. He's most famous probably for Glengarry Glen Ross. He wrote The Untouchables. He didn't direct it, but he wrote it. And the other thing I saw by him was House of Games. And he tends to write about these kind of ambitious, acquisitive, scoundrelly, foul-mouthed schemers.
Yeah.
And so this play is about 3 losers in a junk shop plotting to rip off a coin collection that some guy has in his house, and just things going awry. Very funny. And in the actors performed as kind of as you would expect. They were cast in a way that fit,
Right,
they
right.
performed as you would sort of expect. Sam Rockwell, at least the role that I saw him in a movie before, was a pretty like manic character, if I recall correctly, and he definitely has the most sort of attention-getting role in this play, of the most sort of erratic, the most angry, the most consumed with greed character.
Right.
Lawrence Fishburne plays the owner of this junk shop, who's a little older and a little more not perfect, but a little more generous hearted.
Right.
And then Darren Criss, who is the relative, he's relatively new to working with actors of this caliber on the stage.
Yeah.
He played the sort of apprentice character.
Yeah. He's kind of like a a
former junkie.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Who has been taken under the wing of this.
Yeah. And there's like a nice sort of father-son relationship
Right.
that's going on there.
Right.
And, yeah, it's a cool play. I don't actually remember a lot about it because I saw it back when I was like, 18 years old. And it was like the first sort of profound experience that I had with live theater.
Yeah. Well, it's cool. It kind of ends in a way that you don't expect. In a way you expect it to end more dramatically and more catastrophically than it actually does. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for sure. Okay, so now we are going to do our film discussion.
Yeah, well, we've been talking about a lot of comedies on the show lately.
We have?
Yeah. Well, we talked about we had that whole episode on
yes,
Preston Sturgis, and then we had the screwball comedy with Nathan before that.
Right. So we're hearkening back to an earlier era now of comedy.
Yeah. So this is 1936.
It's 1936, so it's the sound era, which is part of what makes the film interesting because Charlie Chaplin is known as a silent film star, although he made some pretty well-known movies after this, notably The Great Dictator. I think that's like 1940 maybe. But this was his last. It's both his first talkie and somehow his last silent film at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it's very interesting. So there is voice, there's music, there's sound effects, which are used to great effect. But there's also dialogue and singing. But all of the spoken dialogue is only mediated through technology. So it's somebody speaking on a TV screen, it's somebody speaking on the radio, somebody speaking through an intercom system, things like that.
Yeah.
So the only people who have except for a couple of songs at the end, the only people who have a voice in this film are kind of like people who are mediated through these new voice technologies, which is kind of interesting.
It is. It's super interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the appeal of this film, is that not only is it perfectly Charlie Chaplin and everything that you would expect from the slapstick to the sort of mimey pantomime gags and all of that, but it's also got this like smart commentary that's running through it. Which, I mean, this is true of a lot of his films, but I think that, modern times it's like an hour and a half, an hour, 40 minutes or something. It's a feature film.
Right.
And there's a lot going on, aside from everything that's like meant to just delight and entertain. And I was laughing, the whole time I watched this. Both times I watched it, actually, I just couldn't stop smiling. It's like, it really is very delightful. But then you scratch the surface and you find these little things that sort of give you something to chew on.
Right.
So you already mentioned like how voice is handled, but there's a lot that we can talk about.
That could say that could say things about how Chaplin was feeling about the voice.
Yeah, right.
He was not confident in his ability to use his voice, and he feared they experimented with making this like a full-on talkie and having his character talk, but he had always feared that the audiences wouldn't be able to connect with this character of the Little Tramp, who shows up in a bunch of his movies, and this is the last appearance of that character.
That's right.
If they wouldn't be able to connect with it if they heard his voice, and they did some tests, and that was confirmed for him. So he decided to make this a quasi-silent film.
I think it works really well, actually.
Yeah, so you're still seeing intertitles for the dialogue,
right,
and stuff.
And It's not something at all that you have to like get over. I found that like very quickly I just sort of accepted that like, yeah, in this world, sometimes you just don't have to talk. And then
Right.
other times people do. And, it was like, it really doesn't have to be one or the other. And you kind of wish
Yeah.
that you would see this sort of freedom in
I
films
agree,
more often,
because it's now like, it's almost like so much with technology. It's like now somehow that we have the option, we don't have the option not to use the option.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
But I mean, look, it makes sense. I mean, the reason films were silent is that they couldn't
Right.
record people's voices and do the film at the same time.
Right.
It wasn't convenient to make that work. But still, there is something gained, and it really is in many ways a different art form. It's as different an silent film is as different an art form from sound film as theater is from mime.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So obviously, there's overlap between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But still, it is striking. Like the style of, we've talked about this before, but the style of acting changes, the ethos changes. There's like a real simplicity to a lot of silent films,
Right.
That is really interesting, and of course it has to make use of film as a the visual medium that it is,
right.
To a large extent,
right.
And so you can't lean on dialogue to explain things.
Totally. And that's absolutely what this film is doing. Even though it has some more stuff going on underneath the hood, at the end of the day, it's really just about like the spectacle of Charlie Chaplin, being a goof and doing these amazing things. If you're coming at this like, I'm going to watch this for its story or its like, literary themes or narrative development, like that is not really, it's a vehicle for these ridiculous situations that the Little Tramp gets himself into.
Yeah.
And, all of the amazing stuff that Charlie Chaplin's able to do with that.
But he's definitely interested in ideas. This was my first Charlie Chaplin film that I've seen. And, I've seen one Buster Keaton film. I've recently watched a bunch of Marx Brothers films, although those were all sound films. But Chaplin is often singled out as the one of the great silent comedians and the great slapstick comedians of that era to have a little bit more of an emotional weight to his films. A little bit more of a heart.
Right.
And that's the case in this film, but it's also dealing with ideas. I mean, the inspiration of this film came from a European tour that he did promoting his previous film, City Lights, which was also in the sound era, but didn't make use of dialogue. It just more made use of music and sound effects. He got the inspiration from the conditions of the whole continent during the Great Depression that he observed, and also from a conversation that he had with Gandhi, because he met all of these famous people on his tour. He became friends with like Winston Churchill, George Bernard Shaw, all these different people that he was hanging out with, including Gandhi, who I think he met in London. And they had this conversation about modern technology, and Gandhi was in opposition to it. Chaplin didn't totally agree, but he agreed that machinery with only considerations of profit had put people out of work and been detrimental to their lives.
Yeah, well, there's like right from the beginning of the film, the first image that we see after the credits roll. Well, the first image is a clock, right? That's the credits in front of a clock, and I don't know, the film's called Modern Times. So, from the beginning, you're thinking about this like progression of time. But the very first image we see after the credits is like a herd of sheep.
Yeah.
And then it fades into.
There's a black sheep too.
Oh, really? Yeah. I didn't know this. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But it's a herd of sheep with a black sheep. And then it just cuts to a crowd of men on their way to work at the factory.
Yeah, which is similar to how Metropolis begins, and there's a lot of thematic similarities
Yeah,
between this
right,
film and
right.
Metropolis,
And-
especially in how machinery is handled.
And when did Metropolis? Was that before?
I think that was 1927.
Yeah, yeah.
That was a full-on silent film.
Right, right. So he's probably got that in his mind when
Yeah.
he's doing this. But in any case, right out of the gates, it's like quite in your face with its like sort of social concerns, right? It's even almost a little cynical.
Mm-hmm.
But then that's counterbalanced by the whimsy and the fun of this character, the little tramp. And that opening section, the film is kind of divided into these different chapters, where we begin in the factory, then we move into the little tramp in prison, then he's out getting work. He links up with this other sort of vagabond, this woman who's
The Gamin, which I guess is like an archaic word for a street urchin.
Yeah. And
Played by Paulette Goddard.
She's great. Yeah. They spend a night goofing off in a department store.
Basically his inability to hold down a job, and to find any kind of place in society.
Right. So it moves through different. We have these different chapters.
So it's not just about modern times. Isn't just about technology and machinery.
Right.
It's the whole social. Because the first thing that happens after, so he's in the factory. There's this very long introductory sequence in the factory.
Dude, the factory is my favorite part.
Yeah,
I like the whole movie, but the factory stuff is just golden.
He is doing all this insanely fast conveyor belt work.
Oh man.
He is used as the guinea pig for this machine which they're feeding people.
Oh my gosh, that part's scary,
Yeah.
man. I was watching it with my 2-year-old son, and he was getting a kick out of it. But then during this part where the little tramp is being force fed by this robot and things start to go awry.
Yeah, it's like a time-saving machine, so you don't have to take a lunch break.
Yeah.
It feeds you with levers and stuff.
But
it's shoving this. It's like rotating this corn on the cob on his mouth, and the corn's just flying everywhere.
Yeah,
he's like being attacked with the food.
It's quite terrifying. It actually made me think of some of the images you see from Clockwork Orange, where when the guy's got his he's being brainwashed or something.
It's
being
funny because
forced to
Brendan
watch.
likes to make the face. The face from the Clockwork Orange.
What Thomas is referring to is a funny face that Brendan does. Brendan has never seen a Clockwork Orange. Okay,
Neither have I.
But
I've seen the famous poster with the guy. It's in all Kubrick movies, the creepy face where he's looking down with his eyes.
I don't know where
ahead.
Brendan learned to make this face, but he does it really well. Yeah, but anyway,
he was a little freaked out by the machine.
Yeah, but he liked the movie otherwise.
That's cool.
I was a little freaked out by the machine, frankly.
Yeah.
But
so then that doesn't work out. He ends up having this nervous breakdown where he's spasming in the movement that he has to use to tighten the bolts with his wrenches.
And then he just wants to tighten everything, so he's chasing.
It's like the buttons on a woman's dress.
Yeah.
It's he's chasing people around. He's squirting oil in people's eyes. He ends up demolishing the whole,
it's
sabotaging
amazing.
the whole factory.
It's so incredible. There's explosions as he's flipping switches.
Yeah.
It's so good.
But then the first thing that happens after, so they put him into an asylum for a while. He comes out. He's recovered from his nervous breakdown. And then the first thing that happens is that he ends up accidentally, unwittingly leading a communist rally.
Right.
And then getting arrested again.
Right.
And so, it's not just that, so we've got the capitalism, we've got the factory, but then there's communism, and he doesn't fit into that either.
Right.
And there's the world of organizing. And this is just a guy who is not able to steal a phrase from Taxi Driver, he's not able to get organized or whatever the guy says.
Yeah, because later in the film, when the factory reopens, the little tramp is all excited. He can finally get work again.
Mm-hmm.
He goes back to work, and it's like things are kind of chaotic as you would expect, but things are going all right, and they get interrupted. He and the person that he's working with repairing this machine, by another worker saying, "All right, grab your coats, we're going on strike."
Right.
And you kind of see that this is a disappointment,
Right.
So the film isn't just criticizing in one direction. It's kind of pointing at how there are a lot of forces in modern life that kind of are pushing the little tramp to and fro,
Yeah.
and he can't get his footing.
Yeah.
You know, even
He
when
does
he's
have a good time in jail.
yeah. So when he sort of ends up unwittingly stopping an attempted breakout in jail, and so as a reward, you know, I guess the sheriff or the governor or whatever is granting him his freedom,
Right.
and he's all disappointed because he's got it nice in prison.
Right.
But even that, right, in itself is kind of quite a critique.
Yeah.
That for the little tramp, like he would prefer to stay in prison than to go back out in the world. When he's released
Yeah.
from, the asylum or wherever he's been taken after his nervous breakdown, the doctor says, now take it easy and don't get excited or avoid excitement or something.
Yeah.
And then immediately we have this montage of crowds and traffic and, you know, sort of city bustle,
Right.
you know, and so it's
Totally.
like right away, it's clear that, like, look, there is no taking it easy. There is no avoiding excitement.
Yeah.
You know?
They do it for about 5 seconds when he and his girlfriend get this little shack out by the river or whatever, you know, far away from everything. Well, maybe we should introduce her character.
Sure.
So yeah, Paulette Goddard, who was Chaplin's companion for several years, including at this time, is the Gamin. You know, she's the street urchin. She's introduced in a pretty striking way. It says she's like a creature of the docks who refuses to go hungry, or child of the docks, something like that. And she's on a boat stealing bananas from like a shipment, and she's got like this knife in her mouth.
Yeah.
It's funny because I was watching this little commentary by these French filmmakers, the Dardenne brothers, who are pretty big right now, and they were talking about, you know, how she's like almost like a capitalist, like she's introduced almost as like what a capitalist like fears that a communist is like. She's got this like knife in her mouth. She has this like maniacal look in her eyes.
Totally. That's great.
She's throwing bananas to the children on the dock. She escapes. She goes home. Her mother's dead. Her father. She doesn't go home to find her mother dead, but her mother is already dead.
Yeah.
And her father's there, and then it turns out her father dies. He's killed in some kind of labor dispute or something.
Yeah.
And then she steals a loaf of bread. Her sisters are put into an orphanage, but she escapes. She steals a loaf of bread. That's when she meets up with the little tramp.
Yeah.
Because he wants to go back to jail because he's comfortable there. So he takes responsibility for stealing the loaf of bread. And it's funny how much like assembly line like visuals is repeated in this film, because he's trying to get arrested, so he goes into this restaurant and he's moving along the counter. Like there's all this,
it's like a cafeteria
belt
type. Yeah.
And then later on, when they're in their fantasy house, the cow moves by almost like
and dispenses the milk.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think about it. There is a lot of repeated imagery through the film, like the number of times that he gets thrown into a car and driven off, you know, whether he's being, you know, institutionalized or arrested or what have you.
So anyway, they end up becoming companions after he gets out of prison. Yes, because he's only in prison for 10 days the second time. So he gets out, they get together, she finds, they have this fantasy, and
of home ownership.
Yeah. Because they're sitting outside this little house, and they see the man and his wife come out, and they're like, oh, what if we lived in a little place like that? And they imagine their dream home, which is really interesting because it's like I said, it has that factory resonance with the cow coming by. You don't even see the whole cow. It's like coming by this open door, and then he milks it. It's like he doesn't even have to go out of his house, you know? So it's like, it's got that like modern convenience vibe, but it's also this like bucolic nature thing where like there is no cycle of production. He's literally just milking this cow, you know? And there's a fruit tree literally like with a branch hanging into his window, you know?
Totally.
So it's got both of those things. It's got like the factory vibe, the modern convenience, and this bucolic. Like,
yeah, that's interesting.
Life.
Well, you know, I was struck by just how relevant this film still feels. That like the very sort of social realities that Chaplin is responding to in this film are still the kinds of things that a contemporary audience can respond to. So like in the factory sequence, for instance, I immediately thought about all the countless things I've read about Amazon warehouses, and the way that people are treated there, or the way that they're surveilled. Surveillance is like a big part of that factory sequence.
Right.
He tries to go into the bathroom and take a smoke break, and his boss comes on the screen and says, "What are you doing? Get back to work." But this is literally what's going on with companies like Amazon, tracking their drivers and really surveilling the people that work for them.
Right.
My younger brother used to work for Amazon as a delivery driver, and they were like implementing more and more methods of surveillance and always asking, they had to get their permission, like you had to sign off on being surveilled in this way. Eventually he just stopped signing off, and then they let him go. Well, there's that, but then there's other things, like their night at the department store, for instance.
Yeah, he's working he gets a job as a security guard.
Yeah, but it just made me think about like how many people work in retail, and how retail has really become like kind of like one of the main avenues for employment. It's not just like kids on a summer job, but it's like a lot of people, this is their job, same with the service industry. He gets a job as a waiter at a certain point, and so like these are sort of hallmarks of of modern times, modern economies, where like it's less of your profession is less of like being a tradesman or a craftsman or owning a business, and instead like being locked into these like retail or factory or service industry type jobs. Right. Not that there isn't like dignity in that work, but the relationship to like your labor and like the fruits of your labor is different.
Right.
So like that's all like still super relevant, and I think that for a contemporary audience watching this, that this film is going to still feel very contemporary,
Yeah. And the only place he fits in and doesn't immediately, mess up and lose his job, well, I guess prison. He wants to stay in prison, but then at the end he gets a job being a singing waiter in a cafe.
Yeah, right. And he's not so good at the waiting, but he's quite good at the singing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that gets messed up just because the orphanage people finally track down the girl and chase her, and they have to run away. Right.
So it's still at the end of the day like the system won't even let him have that,
Right.
The film ends with the two of them sort of it's actually kind of an amazing ending because it's like hopeful and beautiful. They march off into the sunset. There's like these hills in the distance. They're going down the road. They've got nothing, but they've got each other. Yeah. They're going to smile. There's like an optimistic, hopeful sense to it, but it's also quite like sad,
Yeah, in the end, there was an original ending that was shot that they decided not to use, where she ends up in becoming a nun.
Oh,
and then he comes to visit her, and they don't really have the same connection anymore. And then he walks down the road by himself, which apparently he had done in a bunch of previous movies. This character, so this is the first movie where he goes off down the road at the end with somebody else.
That's awesome. And it's the last Little Tramp film. Oh, that's great.
Yeah, but apparently in the original, you see her like spirit following, like gambling down the road after him, like along with him or something.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Something like that. I don't know, but I haven't seen it. But
it's almost like he brings her with him,
right?
In a sense, even as she's committed herself to God.
Yeah,
that's a cool ending. I wish that was still the ending. This ending is still cool because the Gamin, she's kind of despairing. She says like, "What's the use of trying? Everything they've attempted has been thwarted." And he says, it's like a very striking line. He says, "Don't say die.
Never say die.
Never say die."
Yeah, which is an old expression that you don't hear much anymore.
We'll get along.
Yeah.
And yeah, so, it's like, it's simultaneously triumphant and like pessimistic or like defeated,
Sad.
like they
don't have a place in society. They're just going off down the road.
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like their attempts, so much of the film is like their attempts to live like a quasi married life.
Right.
Like
Well,
their
that's
fantasies playing house. They're fantasizing about the house. They're living in the shack, just trying to get work.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, and I think that that's really relevant too. You know, like obviously, I don't think that it's impossible for people today to live, you know, the American dream. But like certainly, social circumstances are, you know, make that more challenging. Certainly, you know, like, and maybe American dream isn't the way to put it. But what I mean by that is just that, like, you know, there are a lot of people, I think, of our generation who feel that, you know, marriage is not a possibility.
Right.
You know, starting a family is not a possibility. Home ownership is not a possibility. You know, maybe not in the way that it looked for your parents, for previous generations, but like, I still think that that's something that we can do, obviously. But I think that like the challenges that they encounter in trying to have a stable life, have a stable relationship, you know, I think are also things that are still relevant, you know, because I certainly don't want to trivialize or downplay like the real challenges that do exist, social and economic and all of that are making it more difficult to get married and raise a family and settle down and own, and I mean home ownership in particular, you know, there's like a lot of challenges there. But yeah, you know, it's like it's just amazing. And for a film that, you know, was made in 1936, it just feels like this is still, even the social agitation, the strikes, you know, the clashes between like crowds of people and police, you know, like this is all like feels very fresh, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting to compare it to Metropolis in that Metropolis is trying to make society work, if that makes sense. Like the heroes belong to a group.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
They belong to this disenfranchised group of laborers, this underclass,
right?
And they're trying to bring some kind of reconciliation at the end.
Right.
And this one, they just have to drop out of society. They're pushed out of society.
Right.
So slightly different things happening, but very similar in the use of machines, in machines operating people more than people operating machines.
Dude, there's an amazing image of the Little Tramp literally caught in the gears of a machine. Like he's
right.
It's awesome.
Yeah, somebody compared it to, it's almost like film going through a.
Oh yeah,
you know,
yeah.
A
That's
reel
interesting.
Of film going through a camera.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so he directed this film. There's a lot of great shots, you know, great use of the camera, and also some innovative technical devices and visual effects. Like there's a lot of early uses of matte painting here in a clever way.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's
so
cool.
one of the famous examples is in the scene where he's skating around the upper level of the
I was wondering
store.
about that. Yeah.
There is this whole broken like guardrail that he's in danger of falling down, but he's skating blindfolded and he keeps backing up to it. But that was actually a painting, so they would have like a camera far away at a certain angle with like a painted thing.
Yeah.
At the right angle.
It looks great. It looks great.
So it fits seamlessly. But there's a tell, which is that at one point one of the wheels of his skates like disappears slightly behind the painting. So if you're looking closely, you can notice
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That sequence is incredible. It looks really good. The first time I watched it, I totally bought that there was a whole a gap there, you know, and that he was performing this really dangerous feat. And then the second time I watched it a little more closely, and I thought, you know what, I bet that might be one of these matte paintings.
Right.
But you know, that's like it also highlights one of the other sort of technically impressive elements to this is just his performance.
Right.
A lot of the sequences are single takes, you know, and so you're just seeing these incredible gags, these incredible physical feats that are like seamlessly executed and flawlessly choreographed, you know, like, so that skating sequence is obviously very, very choreographed in a very literal sense. But then even other interactions, like when he's having lunch in prison and there's this elaborate sort of back and forth between him and the guy next to him who keeps taking the bread.
Very frank drug reference in this film.
Oh yeah.
The
No,
nose
but
powder.
what I'm referring to is when he keeps taking the bread.
Yes.
This tough guy keeps taking the bread away from the little tramp, and the little tramp has to like sort of do this sleight of hand to like get the bread. It's like it's executed flawlessly, and it's all in one sequence, you know. And so like his physical discipline in performance, in everything from the most sort of exaggerated reactions to like the most subtle movements or you know, like his walk or the way that he turns or you know,
well, that's like the difference between when he's walking around in the factory and like jerking around, and then he starts to have his nervous breakdown, and he's like doing this ballet dance with the wrenches.
But he's on like 100% of the time in his expressions, in his body. Like this is really, I think, for an actor, you can watch this and it's quite a masterclass in concentration, in like attending to whatever's going on at any given time, whatever his task is. He's like completely in it. His whole body is in it. And a lot of the time he has to maintain that and hit his marks like flawlessly for an extended period of time. So if we're talking about technical things, like technically from a performance place, it's incredible too. Yeah. But certainly from the filmmaking as well, there's like some great examples of match cuts, like when the Gamin is dancing in the street, that's a great shot too. When we see the Gamin dancing in the street, you know, for money or something, and the camera pans across, and she enters the frame, and we see the boat on the waterfront, like sailing directly into the frame too. Like there's just like a lot of elements that are being choreographed at the same time, and the camera's hitting them perfectly. But then there's a cut to her dancing in the cafe where she gets the job, you know. So like visually he's not, it's like he's doing a lot of stuff with the camera and with the editing as well. So he's not a one-trick pony by any means.
Yeah. The music in this film is really awesome. One of my favorite soundtracks. Which we didn't mention, this film is on the Vatican film list. That's why we're discussing it. Yeah. In the category of art, this one. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's got great music. This is probably my second favorite score so far, next to La Strada on the list.
Sure, yeah.
And the Chaplin not only wrote and directed and starred in his movies, but he did some of the sound effects for this, such as the scene where the stomachs are gurgling. Yeah. He did that with like a straw or something. But he famously composed the music for his films too. Yeah. Now, Chaplin he played violin. He wasn't very knowledgeable about music, about orchestration. So what it really was is he had these melodic ideas, and then he would have like a secretary, a musical assistant who would orchestrate, arrange, etc. And in this case, his main collaborator on this film was a fellow named David Raskin, who is known as the grandfather of film music, because he was so prolific. He wrote over like 100 film scores and like something like 300 TV themes, I think. And he's most famous for, I don't know if you've ever seen the noir Laura. No. It's a great movie. It has a very famous theme that both of these themes from both of these movies became standards. Laura is pretty big, but basically David Raskin would collaborate with Chaplin and turn his melodic ideas into full pieces, into orchestrated pieces. Yeah. And it's great. There's a lot of great themes for the different characters. Yeah. There's one theme that is kind of like whenever the institutions come to play, it's like something like that. And that happens with the police when he gets arrested, but it also happens with the minister and his wife when they come into the prison, for instance. But the most famous theme from this film is the theme that plays a couple times. First, when they are he and the Gamin are sitting in front of the couple's house and fantasizing, and then again at the end. And that theme became a hit song in the 50s, it was turned into a song with lyrics.
Oh, cool.
So I watched an interview with David Raskin, who said that Chaplin had said, let's write something like Puccini. So they came up with this Puccini-esque melody. And in 1954, John Turner and Jeffrey Parsons altered the melody a little bit, added a title and lyrics, and it became the song Smile, which was first recorded by Nat King Cole.
Oh, cool.
Have you heard the song?
Yeah. That's where I've heard that before.
The song, the lyrics are very much in keeping with the theme of the film.
Oh, that's cool.
And so it's funny. The first time I ever heard this song was on an album of music by Robert Downey Jr.
Oh, cool.
Because he made an album and I was like, okay, I have to see what this is.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the selection of material that he covers on this album. But I think the last track is Smile. Huh. And that's interesting because Robert Downey Jr., one of his famous roles in 1992 was Charlie Chaplin in the film Chaplin. I haven't seen it, but he got a lot of acclaim for this role, and it was one of the last things he did before he kind of hit a rough patch in life, ended up in jail, and then had this big Iron Man comeback. So I heard it there, and then since then I've played it on cruise gigs. Funnily enough, that was my further introduction to actually learning the tune. And then I heard Nat King, around that time, in 2017 or so, I heard Nat King Cole's version, which is really beautiful. I recommend checking that out if people haven't heard that. And that's the first recorded version of that song. But it comes from this movie. It's always fun for me because as a jazz musician, a lot of this jazz standard repertoire comes from old pop songs, sometimes musical theater, but less frequently, but still sometimes from movies. So Laura is a jazz standard, and I first became acquainted with that song on a cruise gig, playing that tune as an instrumental, and then I saw the movie Laura, which is amazing. Green Dolphin Street is another example of that. So there's a number of instances of this, and Smile is one of them. So it's always fun when I watch an old movie. It might not even be a musical, and then I hear the theme and I'm like, wait, that's where this tune came from.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah,
well, I definitely recommend this film. I wasn't sure what to expect, like, given what I had seen of Chaplin before. I think this is the longest Chaplin film I've seen. And I think it definitely holds up. It wasn't difficult to watch, like an hour and a half long Charlie Chaplin film. Yeah.
By the way, Smile has seen a comeback recently because apparently I didn't see Joker, but apparently the theme of Joker is Jimmy Durante's version.
I
of
think
Smile.
now that I think about it, I think that Modern Times actually makes an appearance in that film.
Yeah,
and that there's like some sort of like some quoting that goes on. Yeah, which makes sense. It's like a darker Modern Times,
right?
Yeah. I think that by the time this episode releases, we will have begun our spring campaign over at CatholicCulture.org. Yes. So it'll either be the Spring Challenge campaign or maybe the Easter Challenge campaign. The point is that we've got a big matching grant that some key donors have offered up for this campaign. So in order to win that, we need to match it. So this is a perfect time to contribute to
We don't know
podcast.
the number yet, but at the time of this episode's release, you can go to CatholicCulture.org to see the actual number that we need to match.
Yeah. And it's a great time to give because your gift will help us win the grant, and that means it'll be matched dollar for dollar. So head over to CatholicCulture.org/donate/audio, and we'll make sure that your donation heads toward our audio production needs.
Yes. We very much appreciate it. We pray for our benefactors daily. All right, everybody, happy Easter. Thank you all for listening, and God bless you. We'll see you next time.